The first time I heard tires ripping through my front lawn, I honestly thought someone had slid in the rain. The sound was sharp, violent, the kind that makes your stomach tighten. The second time, I knew it wasn't an accident. By the third time, I was standing at my living room window, watching the HOA president calmly steer her luxury SUV straight across my grass like it was a paved shortcut she personally owned. She stepped out in designer heels, clipboard tucked under her arm, paused for half a second to look at the fresh ruts she'd just carved into my yard, and gave me a polite little smile. Not an apology, not even embarrassment, the kind of smile you give someone you don't consider important. I live on a corner lot in Red Willow Ridge, a quiet planned community outside Ashford Creek, Missouri. I'm a retired mechanical engineer. My lawn wasn't about appearances. It was order. It was control. And lately, with my wife's health slipping and medical bills stacking up, it was the last thing in my life that still felt predictable. When I finally walked outside and asked her, politely, to stop, she didn't even hesitate. "Oh, a business comes before personal feelings," she said. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about parking. It was about dominance. And she had absolutely no idea who she'd just picked a fight with. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Calvin Rourke. I'm a retired mechanical engineer, the kind of person who spent his entire career solving problems, quietly, methodically, without raising his voice. I was never the loud guy in the room, never the confrontational neighbor. I believed, maybe foolishly, that if you followed the rules and treated people with basic respect, life would usually return the favor. Before all of this started, my days were simple and structured. I woke up early, made coffee, and walked the perimeter of my property while the neighborhood was still quiet. I trimmed hedges, repaired sprinkler heads, and kept the lawn neat not because anyone told me to, but because order mattered to me. Especially now. My wife, Elaine, was beginning to slip in small but terrifying ways, forgetting where she left things, repeating questions she'd asked minutes earlier. Our home became her anchor. Familiar paths, familiar rooms, familiar views out the window. The lawn wasn't just decoration. It was part of the routine that made her feel safe. Red Willow Ridge looks like a postcard from the outside. Manicured grass matching mailboxes. Sidewalks so clean they almost look staged. People wave, but rarely stop. Everyone smiles, but no one really talks. The kind of place where problems are hidden behind closed doors and trimmed hedges. At the center of it all sat the HOA. And at the center of the HOA was Veronica Hale. Veronica didn't just run the association, she ruled it. She hosted charity drives, ribbon cuttings, seasonal festivals. She loved microphones, loved standing slightly elevated above everyone else, loved the way people deferred to her. HOA meetings felt less like discussions and more like performances, with Veronica at the center, basking in nods and polite applause. The community clubhouse sits directly behind my property. There's a large, paved parking lot attached to it. Plenty of space, plenty of lighting, plenty of access. But Veronica decided my lawn was more convenient. It started subtly. One day I noticed fresh tire marks cutting diagonally across my grass. I told myself someone must have made a mistake. Then it happened again and again. Always the same path, always the same angle. Then I saw her do it. She drove straight across my lawn, parked near the clubhouse entrance, stepped out like she'd done it 100 times before, and didn't even look back. The next time she brought someone with her, a vendor maybe. The time after that, 2 more cars followed her tracks like she'd drawn invisible lines across my property. I waited until I caught her in the act and walked over, hands visible, voice calm. I tapped gently on her driver's side window. She rolled it down halfway and smiled, amused. Like this was a cute misunderstanding. I told her I didn't mind helping when people needed something, but this was private property, and I needed her to stop driving across my lawn. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, it's fine," she said. "The HOA has implied access rights. This is community business." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I went home and did what I've always done. When something didn't sound right, I researched. There were no implied access rights, no easements, no emergency clauses, nothing. My lawn was mine. Period. By the time I had that confirmed, it didn't matter anymore. The damage was accelerating. The grass turned to mud in places. Sprinkler heads cracked. Tire grooves deepened. Every time a car crossed the lawn, Elaine flinched. She'd grip the arm of her chair and ask what that sound was. Sometimes she'd ask if someone was trying to get inside the house. I started closing the blinds more often. What bothered me most wasn't just the destruction. It was the certainty with which Veronica acted. The assumption. The confidence that no one would stop her. Neighbors noticed but said nothing. A few gave sympathetic looks. One quietly told me, "You don't want to get on her bad side." That sentence stayed with me, because I realized this wasn't about convenience anymore. It was about testing boundaries, seeing how much she could take before someone pushed back, and I had been letting it happen. Every problem I ever solved as an engineer started the same way: to observe the system, identify the pattern, understand the forces at play. So I stopped reacting emotionally and started paying attention. She always entered at the same angle, same speed, same stopping point, same tire placement. Veronica Hale didn't just cross my lawn. She repeated herself. And repetition, when you know how to read it, is a gift. I started the way any reasonable person would. I didn't jump to threats or lawyers or shouting matches. I tried calm, visible solutions that any normal adult would understand as a clear boundary. The first thing I put up was a simple decorative rope barrier. Nothing aggressive. 2 low wooden posts with thick rope strung between them, positioned exactly along the path her tires had been cutting through my lawn. It was tasteful, temporary, impossible to miss. The next morning I heard the sound again, not slowing, not hesitating. The rope snapped like string. One post bent. The other tore straight out of the ground. I watched from the window as Veronica drove through it, without even tapping the brakes, parked like usual, and walked away without looking back. That was the moment I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet. Disbelief. The kind that makes you question whether you're dealing with an adult at all. I removed the broken posts and tried again, this time with signs. Small, neat, professionally printed. I made sure the wording was legally clean and unemotional. Private property, no vehicle access, nothing insulting, nothing dramatic. She didn't just ignore them, she flattened them. I found one snapped clean in half near the curb. Another pushed face down into the mud. Tire marks ran straight over both. 2 days later, an official HOA violation notice appeared in my inbox. The charge wasn't for damaging community property. It wasn't for driving across a lawn. It was against me. The notice claimed my signs were hostile, unwelcoming, and detrimental to community harmony. I was ordered to remove them immediately and assessed a fine for unauthorized signage. I read it 3 times before it fully sank in. She wasn't just crossing my lawn anymore. She was rewriting reality. I decided I couldn't stay quiet. I attended the next HOA meeting, my first one ever. The room was packed. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee and paper. Veronica stood at the front, perfectly composed. When I raised my hand and calmly explained what had been happening, she didn't deny it. She reframed it. She talked about shared responsibility, about temporary accommodations, about how one homeowner's resistance can disrupt community flow. She smiled the entire time. Then she looked straight at me and said, "We all make small sacrifices for the greater good." People shifted in their seats. No one spoke up. No one met my eyes. Fear hung in the air, thick and quiet. I realized most of them had already learned the lesson I was just starting to understand. Keeping your head down was easier than standing up. The fines escalated after that. One day it was signage. The next it was lawn condition violations, then improper landscaping, then failure to maintain irrigation. Even though the irrigation system had been damaged by the very vehicles she allowed to cross my property. The notices came almost daily, each one small enough to seem manageable on its own. Together, they formed a steady pressure, like water dripping onto stone. Meanwhile, the lawn deteriorated rapidly. Grass turned to sludge. The sprinkler line cracked fully and flooded one section, leaving another bone dry. Elaine grew increasingly unsettled. Every unfamiliar sound made her tense. She started asking if someone was angry with us, if we were in trouble. I stopped opening the front blinds. At night, I sat at the kitchen table rereading the violation notices, trying to understand how things had escalated so quickly. That's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The damage was consistent, not random, not chaotic, consistent. The tire marks entered at the same angle every time. The deepest rut was always on the same side. The stopping point never varied by more than a foot. I pulled out old photos from my phone and lined them up by date. Then I printed them. Then I laid them out across the table. Patterns jumped out immediately. Same angle, same tire, same stopping point. Veronica wasn't careless. She was repetitive. And repetition, to someone with my background, isn't noise. It's data. I realized I'd been treating this like a personal dispute, when in reality it was a system. One person abusing authority, protected by silence, relying on intimidation and predictability. And predictability is a weakness. That was the moment my frustration finally gave way to focus. I stopped asking why she was doing it. I started asking how. Once I stopped reacting and started recording, everything changed. I mounted a small camera inside the front window, angled just enough to capture the lawn without feeling invasive. Then another, hidden lower, to catch tire movement. I began logging dates and times in a notebook the same way I used to log machine failures at work. Not emotionally, precisely. Every pass across the lawn got a timestamp. Every rut got a measurement. I photographed sprinkler heads before and after events. I filmed the approach angle, the wheel position, the stopping distance. I wasn't trying to catch her anymore. I was building a record. It felt grounding, familiar. This was how I'd solved problems my entire life. A few days into it, my neighbor across the street, Harold Denton, wandered over while I was crouched near the curb with a measuring tape. Harold was retired too, a former insurance adjuster who'd spent decades evaluating property damage claims. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just watched for a moment and nodded. "That's not wear and tear," he said quietly. "That's repeated vehicle damage." He told me he'd been noticing the situation for weeks, but hadn't wanted to interfere. When I showed him the photos, he confirmed what I already suspected. The damage wasn't cosmetic, it was structural. Compacted soil, broken irrigation lines, turf death that would require full replacement, not patchwork. That night, Harold came back with a clipboard of his own. He helped me estimate repair costs conservatively, not inflated, not emotional, just accurate. The number was higher than I expected. A few evenings later, Harold brought his son, Lucas, by. Lucas was a journalism student home for the semester, sharp-eyed and curious in a way that reminded me of myself when I was younger. He listened quietly as we explained what had been happening, then asked a question that caught me off guard. "Has she done this to anyone else?" I didn't know. Lucas did what journalists do. He started asking around. Quietly, casually, he talked to neighbors at the mailbox, at the dog park, outside the clubhouse. What came back made my stomach drop. I wasn't the only one. A couple on the next block had their landscaping damaged during one of Veronica's charity events. Their insurance claims stalled, then disappeared. A single mother near the entrance had her mailbox knocked over by a delivery truck tied to an HOA function. She was told repairs were being handled and never saw a cent. Lucas started pulling publicly available HOA financial records, budgets, reimbursement logs, event expenses. Nothing illegal at first glance, but something felt off. He showed me a spreadsheet one afternoon, rows highlighted in different colors. Every major event Veronica hosted had corresponding: repair reimbursements, lawn restoration, landscaping services, irrigation fixes. The amounts were oddly consistent, rounded, repeated. More interestingly, the vendors listed weren't local. They were tied to a single out-of-state landscaping company with minimal online presence. Lucas dug deeper. That company traced back to an LLC. The LLC shared an address with a relative of Veronica's. Not proof of wrongdoing on its own, but enough to raise serious questions. Meanwhile, I continued documenting, and the more I documented, the clearer the pattern became. Veronica wasn't just abusing her authority casually. She was operating within a routine. Events created damage. Damage created claims. Claims created payments. Payments flowed through channels she controlled. Parking on my lawn wasn't a mistake. It was part of a system that depended on people not pushing back. Once I understood that, the emotional weight shifted. I wasn't being targeted randomly. I was being used, and that meant there were rules. Predictable behaviors. Pressure points. Harold encouraged me to file a formal insurance report. Lucas suggested holding off, just long enough to gather a complete picture. I trusted them. Both men approached the problem from different angles, but they agreed on one thing. If I acted too soon, she'd shut it down. I started noticing things I would have missed before. How confident Veronica looked when she crossed the lawn. How unconcerned she was about witnesses. How comfortable she seemed knowing no one had ever stopped her. At the next HOA meeting, she spoke about transparency and community trust. I watched her carefully, noting the phrases she used, the way she deflected questions, the way people still avoided eye contact. Fear was the glue holding her power together. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by photos, logs, estimates, and spreadsheets. Elaine was asleep in the next room, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel helpless. This wasn't a neighbor dispute anymore. This was a pattern of abuse hidden behind procedure and paperwork. And systems like that don't collapse because someone yells. They collapse when someone documents them thoroughly enough that they can't be ignored. That was the turning point. I stopped asking how to make her stop. I started asking how to make the truth unavoidable. Lucas didn't rush the next step. He slowed down, which told me immediately he'd found something real. He came over one afternoon with his laptop, asked if Elaine was resting, then sat at the kitchen table like he was about to deliver bad news. On the screen was a web of documents, corporate filings, payment summaries, and public records stitched together with careful notes in the margins. The landscaping company that kept appearing on the HOA reimbursement logs wasn't just obscure. It was hollow. No real office, no reviews, no local permits. Just a registered name, a mailing address, and a thin paper trail. That address belonged to Veronica Hale's sister-in-law. Not a smoking gun on its own, but Lucas kept going. He traced payments from HOA event budgets into insurance reimbursements, then into the landscaping company, and finally into personal accounts linked to the same family circle. The amounts were always just under thresholds that might trigger closer scrutiny. Clean, careful, repeated. It wasn't sloppy. It was practiced. I sat there quietly, hands folded, while Lucas explained how the system worked. Damage created by HOA events was documented just enough to justify claims. Those claims were routed to a company that never actually did the work. Homeowners were told repairs were handled or denied outright. Money moved anyway. I thought about my lawn, the invoices I'd received accusing me of causing damage I didn't create, the confidence with which Veronica had acted. It all clicked into place. She wasn't inconvenienced by crossing my lawn. She benefited from it. The next move was risky, but I needed to know one thing. I asked her directly. I caught Veronica outside the clubhouse one morning, just as she was packing up from another event. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I showed her a printed summary of dates, damage, and reimbursements. I asked her to explain how my private property kept showing up as an expense line item. Her smile froze. For a split second, the mask slipped. Then it snapped back into place. She told me I was misinterpreting financial records and suggested I stop obsessing. She warned me that continued documentation could be seen as harassment. She said the HOA had legal counsel and that I was putting myself in a dangerous position. 2 days later, the letter arrived, a formal cease and desist, legal letterhead, cold language, accusations of intimidation, stalking, and disruptive behavior. It demanded I stop recording, stop contacting board members, and stop discussing HOA finances with other residents. I read it twice, then sat very still. The letter didn't scare me. It clarified everything. If I were wrong, she wouldn't have responded like that. If this were harmless, she would have dismissed me. Instead, she went legal. Fast. She was scared. That realization stripped away the last of my hesitation. I had spent weeks trying to stay small, trying not to provoke her, trying to solve this quietly. But invisibility was what made her powerful. That night, I reorganized everything. I labeled files, backed up footage, duplicated records. I shared copies with Harold and Lucas. I consulted a lawyer friend of mine, careful not to ask for favors, only opinions. He told me 2 things. 1, I had every right to document activity on my own property. 2, bullies escalate legally when they think intimidation will work. Veronica didn't want resolution. She wanted silence, so I stopped giving it to her. I started attending HOA meetings regularly, sitting in the front row, calm, silent, watching, taking notes. I spoke to neighbors openly, not accusing, just asking questions, listening, letting them talk, letting them realize they weren't alone. The tone shifted, subtle at first, less eye contact avoidance, more whispered conversations. Veronica noticed. Her behavior changed. She started scanning rooms, cutting meetings short, speaking faster, and yet she still crossed my lawn. Still the same angle, same tire, same stopping point. Confidence can become arrogance when it's gone unchallenged long enough. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. The system she built depended on predictability, and predictability, once understood, can be turned against itself. That was the moment I stopped trying to stop her and started preparing to end her rule. The notice arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped neatly into my inbox like it was routine business. Veronica was hosting her largest charity gala of the year. Caterers, donors, local press, the whole performance. Buried halfway down the page was a single sentence that made my jaw tighten. Due to anticipated attendance, my lawn was designated as temporary overflow parking. Not a request, not a conversation, a declaration. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something close to admiration for the audacity. After everything I had documented, every conversation she knew I'd had, every subtle shift in the neighborhood, she still believed she could take what wasn't hers simply by putting it in writing. That told me 2 things. First, she still thought she was untouchable. Second, she wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I didn't respond to the notice. I didn't protest publicly. I didn't send emails or warnings or threats. I thanked the volunteer who forwarded it to me and went back to my routine like nothing had changed. Quiet preparation has always been my strength. Over the next few days, I installed additional cameras. One captured the full approach from the street, another focused on the precise section of lawn she always used. A third recorded audio, just enough to capture voices without intruding beyond my property line. Everything was time-stamped and backed up automatically, stored in multiple places. I measured the depth of the soil where the tire always landed. I checked the compaction levels. I reviewed my old photos again, overlaying them with fresh ones. The pattern was perfect, predictable to the inch. I consulted a lawyer friend carefully, casually, framing it as a hypothetical. I asked what preventative measures a homeowner could legally take to stop repeated trespass without causing harm. He listened, then smiled faintly. "Your property," he said. "You're allowed to protect it, as long as you don't intend to damage anything or anyone." I asked him again, slower, just to be sure. He repeated it. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Elaine sensed the change. She asked why I seemed calmer. I told her things were finally making sense. She nodded, content with that answer, and went back to her book. I made sure the plan wouldn't hurt anyone. That was important to me. I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. I wanted proof, public, undeniable proof. I wanted her actions to speak for themselves. The night before the gala, I stood in the yard under the porch light, listening to the quiet. The lawn looked fragile, scarred by weeks of abuse, but still holding together. I worked carefully, precisely restoring the surface just enough that nothing would look unusual. By morning, everything appeared normal. The day of the event arrived bright and warm. Cars lined the street early. Caterers unloaded equipment. Volunteers bustled around the clubhouse. I watched from the window, cameras running, notes ready. And then she arrived. Veronica Hale drove up exactly the way she always did. Same speed, same angle, same confidence. She didn't look at the lawn. She never did. She didn't need to. She was certain. As her SUV rolled forward, my heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt only a steady calm, the kind that comes when every variable has already been accounted for. The tire reached the spot, and the system responded. The sound wasn't loud, no drama, just a sudden resistance, followed by a stop so abrupt it startled her. She pressed the accelerator. Nothing. Pressed again. The wheel spun uselessly. Within seconds, confusion replaced confidence. She stepped out, heels sinking slightly into the grass, her smile gone. She looked down, then around, then back at her car, as if reality itself had malfunctioned. Guests began to notice. Phones came out. Whispers spread. I waited. I let the cameras record everything. I didn't touch her car. I didn't shout. I didn't even step outside right away. I let the moment stretch, let the questions build, let the illusion of control dissolve in front of an audience she had carefully curated. When I finally walked out onto the porch, the noise dipped. People turned. Veronica saw me and opened her mouth to speak. That was when I knew. The trap wasn't the ground beneath her tire. The trap was the truth, exposed at exactly the moment she could no longer hide it. And there was nothing she could do to stop what came next. She didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. Veronica Hale rolled into the street like she owned it, smiling and waving at donors as if the night already belonged to her. Her SUV turned at the exact same angle it always did, cutting cleanly across my lawn with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no and actually believed it. I watched it all unfold through the front window, every camera light blinking quietly, recording history. The front tire reached the spot. There was a dull, muffled sound, almost like stepping on a sponge, then resistance. The wheel sank just enough to look wrong, then stopped completely. Veronica tapped the accelerator. The tire spun. She tapped it harder. Nothing. She leaned forward, confused. Then the expanding foam did what it was designed to do. It surged upward around the tire, fast but silent, swelling and hardening in seconds. Not violent, not explosive, just inevitable. The wheel locked into place like it had been cast into concrete. Her SUV didn't lurch. It didn't crash. It froze. For a moment, there was silence. Then the murmurs started. Heads turned. People pointed. A few gasps rippled through the crowd as Veronica stepped out, heels wobbling as she looked down at the immobilized tire. "What is this?" she snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. She kicked at the foam. It didn't budge. Phones came out almost immediately. Donors, volunteers, caterers, even board members raised their screens. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered her name. Veronica's face flushed red. She spun in a slow circle looking for help, for authority, for someone to fix this for her. Then she saw me. I stepped out onto the porch slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I walked down the steps and stopped a few feet away, well within view of every camera pointed in our direction. She started yelling immediately, accusing me of sabotage, of vandalism, of criminal behavior. Her words tumbled over each other louder and louder until she was almost shrieking. I waited. When she finally paused to breathe, I spoke calmly. "I asked you to stop driving across my lawn," I said, repeatedly. "I documented every time you ignored that request. I documented the damage. I documented the fines you issued me for damage you caused." She tried to interrupt me. I kept going. "This is my private property. You trespassed again tonight, just like you have dozens of times before. Everything that happened here was recorded." I gestured toward the cameras, toward the crowd, toward the phones. "You were warned. You chose not to listen." Someone in the crowd asked if the police had been called. I nodded. "Yes." That's when the first cruiser pulled up. The officer stepped out, calm, professional, already briefed. He spoke to Veronica first. She tried to take control of the conversation, flashing her title, invoking HOA authority, demanding action. The officer listened politely, then asked to see documentation. I handed him a folder. Time-stamped photos, video stills, repair estimates, OA notices, fine statements. Everything organized, labeled, and backed up digitally. As he reviewed it, another vehicle arrived. Then another. These weren't uniformed officers. They introduced themselves quietly, badges flashing just long enough for people close enough to notice. Federal investigators. White-collar unit. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't need to. Veronica noticed them too. Her voice faltered mid-sentence. Her posture changed. The confidence drained out of her face as reality finally caught up. One of the investigators asked her a few simple questions about HOA reimbursements, about vendor relationships, about repeated damage claims linked to her events. She stammered, deflected, tried to laugh it off. The crowd had gone completely silent. Someone near the back said, "Is that true?" Another person muttered, "That happened to us too." A board member stepped forward, pale, suddenly very interested in distancing himself. Veronica tried one last time to regain control, accusing me of staging the entire incident. The investigator asked if she'd like to make that statement formally. She didn't answer. A tow truck arrived, its lights washing over the lawn, the foam, the frozen wheel. It took time to free the vehicle. Solvents, tools, more documentation. Every second stretched the moment longer, made it more public, more undeniable. Veronica stood off to the side, arms crossed tightly, avoiding eye contact as phones continued recording. By the time the SUV was finally removed, the gala was over. No speeches, no applause, no photo ops, just quiet conversations, shaken expressions, and the unmistakable feeling that something permanent had ended. She didn't look at me as she was escorted away to answer further questions. She didn't need to. The crown had already fallen, not because I took it, but because everyone finally saw what it was built on. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in waves, each one heavier than the last. By the following morning, an emergency notice went out to the entire neighborhood. Veronica Hale was placed on immediate administrative leave from her role as HOA president pending a formal investigation. The language was careful, legal, stripped of emotion, but the meaning was clear. Her authority was gone. Within days, external auditors were brought in. Not the friendly consultants the HOA had used before, but independent firms with no ties to the board. They requested records going back years, every event budget, every reimbursement, every vendor contract. Neighbors started receiving calls asking questions they'd never been asked before. The stories began to surface. A retired couple who paid out of pocket for driveway repairs they were promised would be covered. A family whose landscaping was destroyed during a fundraiser and quietly ignored. A renter who'd been fined for damage caused by an HOA contractor and told there was no appeal. What once felt like isolated frustration suddenly formed a pattern everyone could see. The board didn't survive it. One member resigned quietly. Another followed within days. Meetings were canceled, then rescheduled, then canceled again as legal counsel changed. Eventually, the entire board was dissolved and replaced with interim leadership under community oversight. For the first time since I'd moved into Red Willow Ridge, the HOA was answering questions instead of silencing them. As the investigation progressed, charges followed. Not dramatic, headline-grabbing arrests, but something far more serious: financial misconduct, misrepresentation, improper use of funds. The kind of charges that don't disappear with apologies or influence. Veronica's name faded quickly from notices, then from conversations. People stopped whispering and started speaking plainly. And then something unexpected happened. Neighbors knocked on my door. Some came to apologize for staying silent. Others came to thank me. A few came simply to talk, to finally say out loud what they'd been holding in for years. There were tears. There was relief. There was a strange sense of shared survival. While all of that unfolded, contractors arrived at my property. This time, the work was done right. They removed the ruined soil entirely, regraded the lawn, replaced the irrigation system, and laid fresh sod with careful precision. They installed subtle barriers at the property line, approved unanimously by the new board. No objections, no fines, no letters. I stood in the yard one afternoon watching the grass take root, feeling something settle inside me that I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Elaine noticed it too. The sounds that once startled her were gone. No engines cutting across the lawn. No shouting. No tension bleeding into the house. She slept through the night again, her breathing even. Her hands relaxed. One morning, she walked outside with me and smiled at the yard, as if seeing it for the first time. "It's nice," she said softly. "It feels safe again." That mattered more than any investigation or consequence ever could. The house changed after that, lighter, quieter. We opened the blinds. We sat on the porch in the evenings. Neighbors waved and actually stopped to talk. Red Willow Ridge still looked like a postcard, but now it felt different, real. The system that had allowed one person to dominate had been dismantled, not by shouting or threats, but by patience and proof. By refusing to disappear, I didn't celebrate Veronica's downfall. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in watching someone lose power. It was in watching a community reclaim it. And in knowing that sometimes the smallest, quietest resistance is what finally restores balance. When I looked at the lawn, I no longer saw damage. I saw resilience. Looking back on everything that happened, the part that still surprises me the most isn't how far Veronica was willing to go. It's how long all of us, myself included, accepted it as normal. Power like that doesn't come from strength. It comes from silence, from people convincing themselves it's easier to look away than to speak up. I learned that bullies don't need fists or shouting. They hide behind titles, procedures, and paperwork. They rely on confusion, on the idea that no one will take the time to slow down, document the truth, and challenge the story they've been telling everyone else. But the moment that story is exposed to daylight, it starts to fall apart on its own. I didn't win because I was louder or angrier. I won because I stayed calm when I wanted to react and patient when it would have been easier to quit. I treated the situation like a system instead of a personal insult, and once I understood how that system worked, it couldn't protect her anymore. Most importantly, I learned that standing up doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means refusing to disappear, refusing to be rushed, refusing to let someone else decide what you're allowed to endure. Our home is quiet again. Our community is healthier. And I know now that even the smallest voice can make a difference when it's backed by truth. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?